I'll get going. So yeah, I'm Phil Brown. I'm the Bird Conservation Director at the Harris Center, and I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite topics today, hawk migration. This is the season, this is the week for the big numbers of broad-winged hawks at our local hawk watch, Pack Monadnock. And that's what my talk's going to focus on what you can see up there, but also in other places in the Northeast, especially at this time of year as the Hawks are making a journey down the Appalachians and down the coast. So a lot of this will be applicable even if you're not a Monadnock area resident. So get out there and look up at the sky, and you're bound to see something soon. Um, so I'll jump into what is a raptor, first of all. The really the defining feature of a raptor that is probably most famous are those hooked talons, those big claws that do the dirty work. They do the killing. Raptors are all carnivores. There are no vegetarian raptors out there, as far as I know. They are meat eaters. They eat a variety of things from birds to mammals, snakes, insects. They hunt their prey. They have hooked bills for tearing apart the food. They have incredible vision. Um, and what is this group of birds of prey or hawks in general? It covers the ospreys, eagles, harriers, the true hawks. And in this case, we also include vultures, which are not true raptors. They use their sense of smell, and they also will eat meat, but they don't hunt it themselves. So yeah, a little bit about hawk watching and some of the things that we're going to be addressing in this talk. What is our role? Who are the main players? How are they faring? Of course, how do we identify them? I'll be getting kind of deep into the weeds on some of these, so be ready for a little bit of fine detail here for identifying, and especially people often who come up to the Hawk Watch want to know, where are they going? Where are they all coming from? Migration monitoring. This is what we do uh, at the Harris Center. We have a research project um, at Pack Monadnock, which is now going into its 20th year. It's 20 years old now that we've been counting migrating raptors every fall from the same place at the same time, basically. And by systematically standardizing the data from one location over the long term, we can come up with a data set that has a lot less fuzzy edges. It's a little more honed in than a lot of more incidental observations. So it's really a great way to measure how populations are changing over time and learn about migration patterns and movements that are a little uh, less known in general. But there's a whole network of these hawk watches, and I'll talk about that. The reasons we do it, I think, come down to it being a very fun and meaningful project. We do it because we care about conservation, we care about the species, but they're also just incredible to watch. They're a very engaging group of birds. They get us outside. They bring us together in ways, community ways. And it's a wonderful good news story to celebrate oftentimes, to look at these raptors flying wild despite all the things that they have to deal with in the world. And education, this is core of what the Harris Center does, is reaching people through the outdoors, and showcasing these spectacles. That is a key step on the path to conservation, we like to think. And why should we care about raptors? As a group, they are highly imperiled around the world. Globally, about half of the raptor species have seen declines, and about 1/5 are threatened with extinction worldwide. In New Hampshire, about half of our species are showing pretty significant regional declines, and that is for a lot of different reasons. Historically, we haven't always been great to these raptors through intentional means like the slaughter of birds flying over in migration. The photo on the bottom right is from Hawk Mountain. Hawk Mountain has now been monitoring hawks for 90 years, protecting the mountaintop in Pennsylvania. Um, uh, that was all started by one woman with a vision to protect the migrating hawks, and she and others um, really patrolled this area and kept the shooting away from this one ridge top. So that was the starting point of long-term raptor migration monitoring. And we're still doing it today. It has expanded to include many hundreds of hawk watches around the world. But since then, other threats have come up. The chemical DDT was a big one. Now, today, we have other chemicals. Rodenticides is a big concern. These are the rat traps and mouse traps, which are killing a lot of our birds unintentionally, but it's having big impacts on raptors that are feeding on things that are poisoned. Roads, power development, you name it. There are a lot of threats that raptors have to navigate, but it's amazing to see them do it year after year and still be around. In New Hampshire, we have lists of endangered, threatened, and special concern in that order of significance from the most imperiled on the top. The northern harrier is a somewhat newer addition to the state endangered list. The bald eagle has been bumped down to special concern. So there's a great good news story that has come out of actions that we've taken in order to protect these species. So raptor migration monitoring, I'll switch focus a little bit now to this network of sites, which is over 200 strong as of 2022. Most states have a hawk watch or a raptor migration watch, and there are many in the Northeast. You'll see a cluster of white dots there, and that is because, well, hawk watching started in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of hawk watch sites along the Appalachians. There are sort of many great lookout points, and the spectacle is really well celebrated all the way from Maine to Georgia down the Appalachians. But it occurs in lots of other spots too. Coastlines, the Great Lakes have some excellent hawk watches, the Rockies, the West Coast, all the way down into South America. And each year, many of these sites are hanging on for longer and longer, and those data sets that they're gathering are incredibly useful, especially for this project called the Raptor Population Index, which is a tool to analyze raptor populations. The project partners are all listed at the bottom, and Pack Monadnock is among the select hawk watches that has been chosen for the most recent analysis. So this is brand new data that I just plugged in not too long ago that I'll be sharing with you that shows how the raptors are faring in our area, especially. And the trends in the east have been a mixed bag, a few species increasing, a few species holding steady, and quite a big list of species that are showing declines in migration. And we'll get into some of those reasons too down below. So how do we do it? Where do we go? When do we watch? Fall migration is more significant than spring migration in a lot of our inland sites in New Hampshire anyway. And that's because of several reasons, but it has to do with the winds and weather, the cold fronts that are bringing north and west winds that give the birds the lift off the hills, and then a tailwind heading to where they're going, well south of here. That's a significant funneling barrier in a way. The mountains form barriers, and the birds can follow these ridge lines and move pretty far without having to work as hard. There are also more birds in the fall. Think about each of these birds are nesting in the summer in the northern hemisphere, north of New Hampshire maybe, and they're having between 1 and sometimes 4 or more young. They're not all surviving, but many of them do, and so they're just more. There's probably twice as many birds in the air in the fall because they don't always make it through that first winter. That's a very perilous time for them. Mid-September to mid-October are best in the Northeast for the majority of the species and the biggest numbers. And in particular, mid-September right now is the best time for the big numbers. And that is mostly represented by the spectacle of the broad-winged hawk migration, which I'll get into shortly. But there's different timetables for every species, and the fall migration runs through late November, and we count until November 20th. The raptors are utilizing these thermals, which are rising pockets of warm air. It's kind of like an elevator, picturing a spiraling current of air which gives these birds a lift without having to work hard. All they have to do is set their wings out and catch the wind and rise up. And for every mile or so that they rise up, they can get about 7 miles in distance without having to flap very much, without having to work so hard. So a wind at their back, some updraft, some wind against the mountains are beneficial, especially if it's coming from behind them, pushing them the way they're heading. So wind direction is very important. These clear weather days, like we're having right now in the Northeast, a good migration day for sure. The winds were a little bit unfavorable today, so it wasn't a huge day on the mountain today, I understand. And then I put in listen to the calls of songbirds. The songbirds see and communicate with each other, and they know when there's a hawk around. So I'm always listening to those alarm calls, and it's a good way to find raptors. And when to hawk watch, we have a great website, hawkcount.org. Our hawk counter submits a report every day and puts in a prediction about the next day. We're not always right. In fact, sometimes we're mostly not right, but we like to think that we are trying to predict migration somewhat accurately at times. And this is what it's like up on the summit of Pack Monadnock Mountain, a partnership of the Harris Center, New Hampshire Parks, and the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. Miller State Park is 2,290 feet in elevation. It has a fantastic vantage point to the north that the Harris Center helps maintain, and a short trail that leads from the summit, which allows thousands of people to interact with the site every year. One of the first things you'll see is this panel when you arrive at the Hawk Watch, which shows the 15 or so raptor species that are migrating by in the fall migration. And there's a lot more to see and a lot of celebration up there, especially in the month of September. Sometimes in the past, we've done hawk releases of rehabilitated raptors, which is always a crowd thrilling event. And yeah, just these nice weather days bring out a lot of people and school groups. I wanted to mention we have hundreds of students each year come up. Sometimes that number is closer to 1,000 total students, and we reach them with educational programs. And Harris Center educators are going into many of these schools throughout the semester and teaching about raptors. So they have lots of points of contact, and a lot of people have gotten their start locally because of the connection with the Harris Center and the Hawk Watch. So what do we see? When do we see it? The broad-winged hawk makes up the big bulk of this pie. Over 3/4 of the total migrants are broad-winged hawks. The second most numerous is the sharp-shinned hawk at about 12 or 13%. And then the remaining 13 species make up the last 13%. There's a lot of numbers to look at on this one, but basically this is the list of species that we'll see each year, an average or mean in the middle, showing some of those high counts in bold of the broad-winged and the sharp-shinned hawk. So on the average year, this is what we see for numbers. And then last year's numbers on the right, showing a few unusually high numbers in blue and unusually low in red. There's always some surprises, and it's different year after year. And we'll get into what influences some of those numbers. So if you think this is what hawk watching is all about at these hawk watches, you are totally wrong. It's it's more often something like a very distant speck that we're using high-powered binoculars and optics, a telescope to identify. However, sometimes they are close, like that bald eagle was. This happens to be a bald eagle in the distance also, showing its flat-winged profile, which is a great field mark. But how do we identify the birds? Basically, I like to think of it as about a 4-step process. The first clue is the overall shape and size. And size can be admittedly hard to judge at a distance when you're seeing a speck in the air, maybe a mile away. But behavior is another indication of maybe the size and the shape of the bird because of how it flaps or how quickly it's moving, how slowly it might be circling like a bald eagle, seems to take a long, long time, many seconds to make one rotation in a thermal. Other birds are turning their wings more rapidly, like a sharp-shinned hawk. And then we want to also try to get some details like the coloration or the pattern of the bird, if it's possible. And the other behavioral detail is, does it fly alone or does it fly in groups? So yeah, I mentioned behavior. Here's behavior of a sharp-shinned hawk, this tiny little guy, diving at a big red-tailed hawk with a 4-foot wingspan. So you get a sense of how tiny this sharp-shinned hawk is. It's about the size of a robin or a blue jay, but still a fierce raptor that can kill and eat blue jays and robins, in fact. Are they solo or in groups? So days like today, I saw a very similar sized kettle of hawks today over Mount Scatutucky right next to the Harris Center today, where I was doing some trail work. And I just happened to look up at the right time, mid-morning, and there was this swarming mass of birds. They were boiling up in this kettle, which is what we call these pockets of thermals that are filled with hawks. Basically, it's like a group of hawks that are using a thermal. It's called a kettle. And broad-winged hawks are really the ones that you'll see in numbers like this in a kettle. So I knew right away those were broad-winged hawks, and we oohed and awed at them and just watched them as they swirled and then suddenly streamed off to the south. It was pretty neat. And those were the only hawks I saw today, but it was not a bad sighting as they were nice and low. Coloration and pattern, great field mark when you can get it. You might not believe me when I say these two are the exact same species. You can see a lot of differences in the color and the plumage and the tail banding, but this has to do with one bird being an adult on the left and one being a juvenile, a young of the year on the right. These are red-shouldered hawks. And in general, you can see big size differences. These are the groupings of birds by each family, the eagles, the buteos, accipiters, and falcons. That represents most of what we're going to be seeing and talking about today. So I'll jump right into it with the buteos. I'll start with the ones that are kind of the true hawks that you think of, maybe that you see on the roadside, the red-tailed hawks, or in your backyard, the broad-winged hawk or the red-shouldered hawk. These are all buteos. And what defines a buteo is basically the shape and size, more the shape really. They have long and somewhat rounded wings at the tips. The wings are pretty thick or broad. They have short tails that can fan out, and they could also be narrow and thin, but they fan them out to adjust so they can catch the wind just the right way. They rely on thermals more heavily than others and have been dubbed the wind masters for that reason. Red-tailed hawk being the most famous of the group for around most of the country. Red-tailed hawks are very abundant across North America. They come in all different colors and color morphs too. Out west, there are very pale ones. There are also ones that are almost all black. So the ones we see in the east, they have this belly band, which is this field mark here. Are you seeing my mouse, by the way, Susie? Is that working? Okay. Great. So the belly band is brownish streaks in the middle. And we're also looking for these brown markings at the leading edge of the wing, which are called patagial area. It's the patagial area of the hawk. So brown patagals, brown belly band. What you might notice about this bird is, where's the red tail, right? I said it was a red-tailed hawk. This is a young red-tailed hawk, which doesn't show the red tail. Oops, oh yeah, I'll get some notes here. There's the red-tailed hawk on the bottom right, showing the adult version, so 2 years or older. They have these red tail feathers that shine very nicely in the sunlight, but they don't show any color on gloomy days, days without the sun. For each of these slides, for each of the species, really the things to look at here that would be most pertinent would be, are they declining on the bottom? And red-tailed hawks are a declining migrant bird. Doesn't mean their population is going down, but they're maybe becoming a little less migratory. There are many studies that are indicating that red-tailed hawks are staying further north The Christmas bird count is a great example of that. It's one of those long-term studies that shows a clear trend that more red-tailed hawks are being detected further north, but in migration, fewer are being detected at these migration stations. So the red-tailed hawks really they can hang on until the snows come and become very heavy. That really tends to move the population south. So whereas they used to move south from our area more in late October, now that's getting pushed further and further back as our winters are coming later and summer and fall are lasting longer. So red-tailed hawks responding to climate change, perhaps. Red-shouldered hawk, the species here, it's a little bit smaller than a red-tailed hawk. It soars with wings that are slightly in a bit of a V, like a dihedral shape above the horizon, more so than the red-tailed hawk, which is pretty flat-winged except for the wingtips. The red shoulder patches on the adult show up nicely, as does the pretty contrasting black and white banded tail. It has multiple black and white tail bands. Remember that when you look at the broad-winged hawk, which has thicker black and white tail bands and fewer of those. So yeah, there are lots of things to remember here, and I don't expect you to get it all, but this is just a few identification tips as we're going through here. Let's see what else to say about them. They are on the increase. Red-shouldered hawks. Many of you maybe are seeing more of these or hearing more of them, especially as they're very vocal in the spring when they arrive back in March and early April in the Northeast. They start calling and they have a high-pitched, long, loud, shrieking call. So they're becoming quite familiar to many people in wooded areas. They have been increasing at about 5.8% per year as at the Hawk Watch. So we're seeing more and more of these. They're pretty stable population-wise overall. They're probably increasing their population into more interior parts of New Hampshire and further north. So a bird from the south that's expanding north. Something that we know is happening with other groups of birds as well. And this is not a hawk. So I threw this one in here because the raven is a familiar sight at the Hawk Watch, and it's big like a hawk. It soars like a hawk. It has a big rounded fanned out tail, often like a hawk. It fools hawk watchers all the time, and it's a great species to watch. But also a meat eater, but not a raptor. Doesn't have those killing talents. And they're a lot of fun to watch. They're very jet black at all. In every kind of light, ravens will be jet black, and that will distinguish them from a lot of the hawks too. They have that long head with a long pointed bill, unlike that short hooked bill of a raptor. And then the star of the show in September is the broad-winged hawk. Notice the tail banding on the adult here, which is just a couple of black and white tail bands, but pretty thick bands. You'll see dark wingtips and a dark trailing edge of the wing. This is a good field mark on a broad-winged hawk in good lighting. Generally, they're a little bit smaller. They're crow-sized. They have about a 3-foot wingspan compared to the red-tailed and the red-shouldered, which are closer to 4-foot wingspan. They do a lot more flapping too because they're a much lighter bird. Even though they're just about a foot shorter, they're far less than half the weight of both of those species. So a very tiny little guy. And they often fly in these large groups called kettles, and we'll see those kettles, and it's not necessarily a behavioral thing. They're not necessarily doing it to get together and socialize, although I like to think maybe they are too when they're up there. Who knows what they're talking about, but they're definitely together for the first time since the last migration, because they don't like each other in the summer. They stay far apart and defend territories from each other, but they're really sharing the airspace, and the air brings them together, and it helps them get where they're going, which is really far south. These birds have a journey of between 4,000 and 7,000 miles. Ones that are nesting around here are going to South America. This is a young broad-winged hawk. You'll notice a similar pattern, a little bit, of that brownish streaking. In general, a lot of the young birds are going to have streaking from head to vent here. So uh, juvenile birds, the brown streaks go lengthwise along the body. Adult birds, the banding goes across the chest, like in this Broadwing going across the chest here. And that's a good clue as to if you're looking at a young bird or an adult hawk anyway. They have a candle flame appearance to the wingtips. They tend to come to a little bit more of a point, and they have these bulging secondary feathers, which gives them that look of, and probably their name, broad-winged hawk. I'll show you the ups and downs in this most recent raptor population index, looking at their populations over time at the Hawkwatch. So this is Pack Monadnock's data from 2006 until 2023, showing not by number, but by an index that is calculating the number per over effort, really. It's looking at the number of hours that we were counting these birds. Oops, there we go. So there's a lot of up and down, and that has to do with their detectability and also their variable migration route. Because they're so numerous, sometimes the winds will be blowing a certain direction for a number of days, and we'll miss the main stream of the flight. So on a poor year, we might see 6,000 to 8,000 broad-winged hawks in recent years. On a good year, we might see up to 16,000. So there's huge variation depending on the winds, also depending on how detectable they are. On a blue sky day like today with strong thermals, these birds could be a mile high, and we could be missing them even with 10-power binoculars. So it's not a perfect science. However, there's a better place to watch broad-winged hawks, and that's further down in the tropics, where you can see a swarm of broadwings like this in a place like Veracruz, Mexico, or the slopes of Costa Rica, where the mountains funnel these hawks, which are they're kind of hydrophobic. They don't want to fly over the ocean as much as possible. They stay away from big bodies of water. So they're funneled between the Gulf of Mexico, as they're going to South America, and the mountains, which come to a pretty close point of about 5 to 10 miles in distance, where these birds have to go through this bottleneck. And it seems like the whole population moves through in just a period of a couple of weeks. And it's an amazing thing to watch. I've seen up to 300,000 birds in one day, an estimated 300,000 in Mexico during their migration. So as they're passing here in mid-September, it'll take them about another month to get to Mexico, to Costa Rica, and then another month to South America after that. So it's incredible to think that they're on the move, and we've been tracking them, as maybe some of you have seen my presentation on the Broad-winged Hawk project. This is a Harris Center project in conjunction with Hawk Mountain, the project leader, to put tags, cellular and satellite transmitters on some of these hawks that are breeding within the Harris Center's super sanctuary area. We've learned a lot about where some of our birds are going. We've learned that are not our birds. We only have them for a few months. They're just as much South America's birds, where they spend most of the winter, and really they're traveling half the year between here and there in those two migrations. So yeah, lots to learn from these, including some pretty neat maps. There's I don't know if you can see the website link on top. I can't, but yeah, Bird Tracker. This is a live website now, I believe. Hawk Mountain is updating this now during migration season. A bird that nested for 3 years in a row in Dublin, New Hampshire, has now begun its southbound journey after going north. That's a whole nother topic I won't get into now, but this bird is in New York State now and on its way, hopefully, back to South America to find some good habitat. And the habitat there doesn't really look like our habitat. You'll see an image here in the middle of your screen showing the mountains of Colombia, where two of the birds that we helped tag ended up using this montane dry forest along a river, where the trees are all very small and shrubby. It's kind of like a high desert, more than very, very different from our densely moist forests up here. So yeah, these birds have to adapt to a range of conditions over that 6 or 7 thousand mile migration journey, finding food all the way, staying out of trouble, and sometimes they get into trouble. So a couple of other species that we'll see very rarely. The top bird, a rough-legged hawk, which is a later season migrant that comes from the high Arctic, and the one on the bottom, which is our best photo of the 2 or 3 Swainson's hawks that we've ever recorded at Pack Monadnock. That pretty much some of the state's only records of Swainson's hawks, which is a Western buteo. Okay, I'll move a little quicker here. Accipiters, small to medium sized with a long narrow tail, and they have to do a lot of flapping, unlike the buteos, to get where they're going. The classic silhouette of the sharp-shinned hawk, the pose here, is that tucked wing appearance, an S-shaped wing, S for sharp-shinned. So you don't always see it, but often they're tucked because they're flying into the wind. The back edge of the wing is also a little bit S-curved. Their head seems to blend into the front of their wings, giving them a capital T appearance. If you look at this bird kind of face up, you might see it as a capital T here. With the long tail that often comes to a square. And they have to fly really rapidly. They're one of the most aggressive of the birds at the Hawkwatch. We see them diving on each other, on bigger birds, on anything they can find. They dive at the fake owl that we have out for just for that purpose, to attract some of the hawks for a little bit of a closer look. Here it is diving at the red-tailed hawk again. So a fierce little guy from the north, with a pretty steady but slowly, maybe slightly declining trend of about 2% per year. We see over 1,000 of these on the average year, and we'll see them all season long until November. But the peak is probably right around September, early October. So yeah, come up most any day, you're probably have a pretty good chance of seeing a sharp-shinned hawk over any other species, especially in October. Its larger cousin, the Cooper's hawk, the head projects further ahead from the wings. The wings tend to be straighter and less S-shaped. You can see this kind of relatively flat trailing edge of the wing and flat leading edge. The tail is long and somewhat rounded at the tip. It doesn't always show up that way. And they'll take advantage of thermals more than Sharpies will. This 2 slides compares that flying T versus the flying cross appearance of the Cooper's hawk. You can see the head sticking further out than the Cooper's hawk on the left. These are very subtle field marks, and we often have a really hard time identifying them. And yeah, any expert will admit, or should admit, that they occasionally cannot identify a sharp-shinned hawk correctly. Sharpie and Cooper's hawks also declining at about the same percentage. Long, slow decline. However, they're probably moving a little bit less than they needed to before also, like the red-tailed hawk. So we think Cooper's hawks are doing pretty well in other places where they're adapting to city life pretty well, where there are a lot of pigeons. So less migratory, but becoming more sedentary, hanging out near your bird feeder, eating pigeons, eating mourning doves. Yeah, you've probably seen one if you've fed birds. The larger cousin of the accipiters is the American goshawk, formerly northern goshawk. It's the largest accipiter, crow to raven sized, big bulky bird, a very gray bird as an adult. Young ones are more streaked like this, and generally they have the same overall body appearance and shape, but a little more robust and maybe bulky overall. Unfortunately, not nearly as common as they used to be. These formerly we had seen almost up to 70 in a season. Last year we saw 6, which is our record low. You can see how that trend is shaping up, declining more than 10% per year as a migrant. And we don't think it's because they're getting less migratory. There just seem to be fewer of them. It's a bird of the deep woods, so the thought about what are some of the impacts. They might relate to things that we can't track as well in the wildlife world, such as mosquito-borne illnesses. West Nile virus seems to be playing a factor to some degree. They've also potentially in some parts of their range had interactions with fissures that are more frequent now to the south. Yeah, some biologists in Pennsylvania have studied this and maintain that fissures, which were reintroduced in that part of the world, have begun to decimate their nests in the nesting season and even eat the adults. So they could be facing a lot of threats, and the Harris Center has been on the leading edge locally and regionally of trying to figure out what's going on, or finding, at least establishing a baseline of nesting goshawks in this region. So that's one of the projects that I'll be involved with again in the spring. And we're gearing up for what might be a regional effort to take a deeper dive into monitoring the species in the Northeast and eventually trying to figure some of those questions out. We can't do that all in one shot, though. It takes a long time and many project partners. So far, we've detected about 4 nesting territories in the Monadnock region. Okay, the falcons. These are birds with pointier wings in general. They come in a couple of different sizes, like this peregrine, which is about the size of the goshawk, bigger, but slimmer. They have long tails as well, pointy wings, and they're strong flyers that are built for both speed and stamina. The young peregrine is very handsomely marked here. They have these long sideburns or kind of helmeted appearance. It looks like it's going into battle, doesn't it? And it just seems like a bird that can do anything it wants. They have these powerful rowing wing motions that makes them stand out and makes them fairly distinctive from a distance. And they put on great aerial displays. Peregrines are one of the success stories in the conservation world in the Northeast. Well, that's after we almost wiped them out as a species. People using DDT, we used DDT until the 1970s or so, and that was thinning the eggshells of eagles, ospreys, peregrine falcons, and many other raptors. And the species was essentially extinct in the wild and had to be reintroduced to the Northeast on these hacking towers. So they were put up on artificial structures, reintroduced, and the population has taken off and is now fairly split between urban areas, famous bridge and building falcons in New York City and Boston and elsewhere. And they also will still nest on cliffs, which was their native nesting habitat. The White Mountains, anywhere there are steep rock faces. We don't really have them in the Monadnock region that I know of, but there are many up in the northern part of the state. And this was a record year, according to New Hampshire Audubon, for peregrine falcon productivity and nesting. So good news for them, increasing, and good news for us because we get to enjoy them. Merlin is a smaller cousin. It's like a smaller, shorter winged form of the peregrine falcon. Also a bird hunter, a bird that moves really quickly and is really in control of the sky when you see it. They're often flapping their wings rapidly and just darting through the airspace. Some hawk watchers say Merlin should be a one-letter word, a one-syllable word, because they're moving so fast. It's hard to get people's attention on them. Their best feature, aside from the pointy wings, shorter, stouter look, is the very dark streaking. They appear very dark underneath compared to the other falcons. Merlins are increasing as a breeding bird also, coming from the north, moving south. Now they've moved through into the mid-Atlantic states. And the kestrel is the last species of falcon we'll talk about here. So on the contrast to the Merlin, which is like, darting and fierce, the kestrel is kind of a slower kind of lollygagger, I like to call it. It's more like a butterfly, whereas the Merlin is more like a dragonfly. That's how I think of those two. Their wing shape is distinctive. They have very long, very angled wings. And when they're flying, they look like floppy banana peels. which is, once you see it and you hear that, it really sticks in your head because it totally makes sense. Um, they're a very colorful falcon, pale underneath. So the Merlin, very dark underneath. Kestrels are very whitish underneath from most angles, especially their belly. Unfortunately, kestrels have been declining. Not terribly much at the Hawkwatch. We still see a fair number migrating through most years, although last year was our record low year of 96. So there's a lot of concern about kestrels, and to that end, the Harris Center has been part of a conservation effort to try to reestablish the kestrel population and increase the kestrel population locally in the Monadnock region. We've put up 45 nest boxes in landscapes that are very open because these are birds of open fields, open country, and several of these have been successful. So each of the past 2 years, I've been involved with nest box monitoring. We doubled the size of our nest box program in the past year, up to 45 boxes now. And this year we banded 25 chicks, which is really thrilling to see birds that wouldn't be here without our intervention at this point in these landscapes. They just don't have the habitat, the structure. The nest box makes a big difference in the right place, and we're continually fine tweaking where we put these boxes, fine tuning it, and hopefully we'll have luck with this program in the long run. Okay, ospreys, similar to bald eagles in many ways. Ospreys are really long-winged, but they have a pretty distinct M-shaped appearance. You can see how the bend at the wrist here, which is a dark mark at the wrist, is very noticeable and very steep. They also have big white bellies and tiny little heads. So a bird that has so much white on the belly and so much white on the wings and has long wings is going to be an osprey at the Hawkwatch. Modeled otherwise, and these are masterful soaring birds, like this image here, just soaring away. And this is the fishhawk, the bird you might know as a fishhawk, very common on the Atlantic coast and really anywhere there's water. This is one of 3 species that occupies 6 of the 7 continents that can be found on all the continents. The other ones are 3 raptor species, I should say, peregrine falcon and the barn owl, I believe. And they are masterful flyers. They can soar out over the ocean, and they're often crossing the ocean inadvertently when they're young, especially when they don't have their migration route perfected. That first year is very perilous. They can be easily blown off course by storms because they're migrating in August and September. And what's happening in the Atlantic at that time? It's hurricane season. So ospreys have been caught up in hurricanes and have perished in storms. Birds that have been tracked have been determined to be lost in hurricanes. This particular osprey was banded in Newfoundland where it nested, or was I can't remember if it was an adult or a young one, but it went for 82 hours over the ocean, many hundreds of miles offshore, until a storm came and it had to find the nearest land down in the South Atlantic here, and it shot into South Carolina and survived. An incredible journey of over 2,000 miles without stopping. They don't have anything to stop on except the occasional ship, maybe, and ospreys will stop on ships. They're declining, though. They're declining at our Hawkwatch. They're declining as a nesting bird in some areas, although they've rebounded in others. It's a little bit baffling, but the inland Hawkwatch sites on the Atlantic coast have been detecting this downward trend of about 5% per year, which is the number that's been generated from our Hawkwatch. We used to see over 300. Now we usually have a hard time pushing 150 or 200. So something is changing. Perhaps competition with bald eagles. That could be one of the factors. Northern harrier. We're getting toward the end here. Northern harriers are beautiful birds. They are slender and lanky with long wings and a long tail. The wings tend to be up in a V shape, like a dihedral. And the male is different. The male is known as the gray ghost, very grayish and white with these black wingtips. Always exciting to see them. We'll see about 100 a year or less. And also a declining bird on our state endangered list. I'll keep moving here. Eagles are the biggest raptors that we'll see, 7 to 7.5 foot wingspans. They're very large, dark birds and powerful flyers, also masterful soaring birds. Bald eagles, we'll see them throughout the season. Golden eagles only in late fall. These are both bald eagles. It takes them 5 years to reach that full adult plumage with a white head and white tail. They're kind of a mix of brown and white in the years leading up to that. And they cause a lot of confusion because we want to call them golden eagles, especially in that plumage here with the contrasting white and black tail. But the head projection is a good clue. The head is about as long as the tail is from the body. So it's about a 1-to-1 ratio, and they have perfectly flat wings when they're soaring. Eagles are going off the charts. Been a great conservation success story. There are now over 100 territorial pairs in New Hampshire. That's up from just 5 or 10 in the year 2000. So great successes all around, increasing by about 10% per year at our hawk watch. Golden eagles, we see about 10 per season, not very common. They have more of a dihedral, a slight dihedral, like a turkey vulture, which is that V shape. And when they're young, they have this white and brown tail with white in the center part of the wing. And the adults are all brown. But notice the really short head on this golden eagle. It's about half the length of the tail there. So that's the big difference between the bald and the golden in flight at a distance. And notice the huge size. This is a red-tailed hawk for comparison, chasing it, which is like a little more than half the wingspan. Down to the last group here, turkey vulture. It has an extreme V shape in the wings. Again, that word, dihedral. Two-toned underwings, no feathers on the head. And they do a lot of teetering back and forth. Vultures are they don't want to flap so much. They do a lot of rocking back and forth. Vultures are increasing, at least in our part of the world. And more than any other raptor, more than any other bird that we're monitoring, over 11% per year. And we'll see them all throughout the early part of the season, but they really start migrating near the end of the month. And now black vultures, a bird from the south, coming in from the south and starting to make near annual appearances at our hawk watch. So now with that, I believe you are all experts and ready for hawk watching. There are a few ways you can follow the Harris Center's efforts and contribute, learn about the network of hawk watching sites, and definitely visit Pack Monadnock this fall. Make a reservation if you're coming up on a weekend, especially, but get up there soon to see the broadwings. It's going to be, over the next week, it's going to be a really good time to see them. And with that, I'll leave my email address here for any questions that I might not get around to, but I'll turn it over to Susie, who has been taking questions, and I'll leave up this slide with resources too.
Well, Phil, there was very little questions. If you have a question, you can throw it in the chat. I'll ask Phil, but somebody like Tom wanted to know if you could recommend any video tutorials on hawks in flight. And I did find one.
Yeah.
Put out by Cornell's All About Birds Bird Academy, but maybe some other ones, and we can.
I do, yeah.
Oh, great.
I'll recommend one that I have here listed, the second resource from the bottom, Hawks on the Wing. It's actually a DVD video version, but I believe it's becoming more digitized shortly. Hawks on the Wing is produced by a friend, Josh Haas, who's been on the board of Humana and an expert hawk watcher. And it's video tutorials comparing two different raptors in flight at the same time. It's incredibly helpful. It was one of the early resources that our former hawk counter Levi learned raptor identification from. So yeah, so obviously it did some good if Levi became an expert pretty quickly. So yeah, that would
Yeah.
be the one I'd recommend here. There are also some great physical books that I'd recommend, and I did I put them up on this list? I may not have, and that's an oversight, sorry. Uh, um,
So
they
maybe
are Hawks in Flight. Hawks in Flight is a great guide to reading all about their identification, especially by Pete Dunn, David Sibley, and Clay Sutton.
we can send out in your follow-up email the link to the Hawks on the Wing and the books that Phil are recommending. And there are a couple of other questions and some really nice comments about how informative the talk was tonight. But Francie wants to know about something called king eagles, which look a lot like vultures to her. What the heck is a king eagle, Phil?
King Eagles. I know of king vultures from Central and South America, and they're white and black, very striking with an orange bald head. Um, Maybe that's what she's thinking of.
Could be. We'll
As
do a
far as the
little.
species,
No.
I don't know the
She says
king
no.
eagle, but there are a lot of eagles, especially in Asia, Africa, Europe. We only have
Oh,
two in the US, aside from the Steller sea eagle, which is the famous bird that showed up in Maine.
all right. Yeah.
Mhm. Is that it?
Well, we'll double check. We'll do a little
Okay.
digging, Francie. And
Thank you.
Collins wants to know, is there anything in particular that the general population can do to help these different species? And Phil, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about especially rodenticide.
Yeah, that's a big one right now. Rodenticide is you might be familiar with these black bait boxes that are placed near public buildings, residences by pesticide, pest treatment companies and just individual landowners. And they're perfectly legal still, but they cause a clotting or an anticoagulant property that makes the prey item pretty much bleed to death. And those prey items are mice, rats, and anything else that eats mice and rats, and any other mammals that might take some of that bait. It doesn't kill them right away, so they run out, they're picked up, and they pass those anticoagulant properties, and basically that will be very detrimental or deadly to a bird that eats it and has any wound that won't heal at that point, is my understanding of it. So there are some alternatives. There's the old-fashioned way of trapping rodents. Everything that was being done before that is not that that was all perfect either, but there are some newer companies that are trying to find alternative ways to poison the target mice and rats without having the impact spill over to the things that eat them.
I
So
just want to add that it isn't just raptors that are impacted by rodenticide. I'm a mammals person, and the fisher population in New Hampshire is actually in decline. And there's some research to suggest that it also has to do with rodenticide. So don't please reconsider using rodenticide. I did put a link in the chat about National Audubon has a really good article on kind of alternatives. So yeah.
other than that, I would say, what you can do around you is a lot of us feed birds and we enjoy feeding birds and that's great. But windows that birds come into contact with are often deadly for both songbirds and raptors as well. So preventing collisions with anything you can do to protect your windows with something that makes them more visible to birds. The American Bird Conservancy is a great resource on preventing bird collisions with the glass. It makes a huge difference. I did it at my house, and it has dramatically reduced the amount of collisions that happen here. So yeah, some of you will probably have said, yeah, like we've had collisions with raptors as well. So that's an impact. Just yeah, being more mindful of their needs when it comes to habitat management is an important one. So avoiding uh, cutting trees at the wrong time where that might have a raptor nest or there might be a disturbance a disturbance around a raptor's nest in the woodlands. Yeah, any number of methods like that. I think American Bird Conservancy would be a great resource, though, in general, for how to protect birds better.
I did put a link on the American Bird Association's Prevent bird strikes.
Great.
So,
Okay.
okay, we're just about at 6:30. We're a little bit over. I want to thank Phil. That was really great. I learned so much, and I've been watching Raptors for over 20 years. So I every time I go up to watch Hawks, I am blown away by the skill of Phil and the other raptor biologists that are up there. If you get a chance to get up to the top of the mountain, please do, and keep your eyes on the sky, no matter where you are. Just look up this time of the season and you might see some stuff. Thank you guys. And Phil, special
Yeah.
thanks to you.
Thank you. Happy hawk watching, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Goodbye, everybody.
See you later.
Bye, Susie.
Hi, Francie. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.